What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. So today I wanted to do another video. This time it's gonna be a video on Sentai, and I do Sentai here and there when I can. And this is a discussion about what has been happening with some of the seasons in regard to recent years. Not necessarily this year, because this year's actually been pretty good with Ninja, but for some reason, every even season recently has been kind of ugh. And recent as in, you may be wondering what years would I be referring to. Okay, I would say as early as, yeah, that's about right. I would say as early as Goseiger. Goseiger, for example, not a season that was really loved at all. It was okay. It was boring. It was very boring. And personally, one of my biggest reasons why I say it's boring is because there were like moments that were interesting, but there's too many villains. There's too many villains. Like one of their hugest problems, and I want to talk specifically about Goseiger here today. Too many villains. Like Goseiger is probably my big topic. I'm gonna probably focus this video on Goseiger because Goseiger alone has a lot I can talk about. Just overall with why it's one of the seasons that's really not particularly loved. And I'm probably doing a couple of these videos where I'll be talking about certain seasons that really weren't liked over time. I'm not sure if these are gonna happen like one after another. Probably not. They're gonna probably come out over time. But Goseiger, for example, is one that really just didn't do well, and America suffered as well. And they tried to improve certain things for sure. Didn't really work out very well because of how many episodes they had, so they really couldn't really develop anything. But one of the biggest problems was the number of villains. You see, there would be a whole bunch of different, like there would be 3 different groups of villains, and the thing is that they would only be there for such a short time that there would be not enough story to go off of, and the villains typically weren't that interesting at times. I mean, some of them were okay for certain moments, and some villains were definitely interesting. And there was, of course, our major, like the one villain that was always there that had different looks. But overall, it was kind of boring, and it was just kind of annoying because it's like you want to have a steady villain. I mean, it's okay if they die like late into the show, and then you get a new villain, and you get it like once, but if it's like, oh, we're gonna do this now, we're gonna do this like another third of the way done, and then another third. It's like, what's going on here? Why do we have so many villains coming in and going? It's just kind of ridiculous. And I get what they were trying to do, but I think it was kind of slow, and I think it really was kind of unnecessary, and the pacing was off. The story overall wasn't that interesting a lot of times. So, a lot of episodes were filler. First of all, the way that they introduced the Zords sometimes were good, but overall not that interesting. The Zords themselves didn't have the most unique or interesting designs. I'm not saying that unique or interesting has to happen per se, but they weren't long and lasting designs where like you would say, oh, that's an awesome design. Like, yeah, it's a good design. I think Goseiger definitely has like a pretty decent design, and I like the combining aspect of the Zords and all that, because it was definitely a huge aspect. But at the same time, it wasn't done to the extent that they really could have done it, and I really don't care for Gosei Ground, for example, too much. I mean, Gosei Ground, sure, he's a nice look, and Gosei Ultimate, I believe it was, decent. And I mean, these were some okay designs for mechs. I mean, I definitely like them in some ways, especially the Japanese, of course, compared to the American. Personally, I think the American stuff definitely did some interesting stuff, and I definitely think that the American stuff definitely should get some more credit for what it did, because I think that they definitely tried. It was boring, and in America, and the reason why it was even more boring in America is because of the fact that the villains lasted even fewer episodes, and the mech introductions were so fast that there was nothing to break anything up. Like, when people complain about, oh, there's too much filler for a show, you have to consider this. There are cases where there's no filler, and too many major things are happening at once, or and that could be good, but then there's the bad good where it's like it's not interesting. Like there's not enough to go off of because you want story. Like if you at least have story and character development, fine. But if you don't have character and story development, then big events are going to happen and you're not going to have any attachment to these characters. So they're just going to change. They're going to die, or something major is going to happen, and you're not going to really care that much for them because there's really no story. So why would you care? That's one of the biggest problems with Megaforce and Super Megaforce, because they didn't really develop the story well. I mean, Goseiger, they kind of gave a little bit of a development, but the characters were too cheery. That's another issue. Goseiger had too much of a cheery atmosphere, too kind, and another issue that was such a huge one that I really, really hated as a whole was the fact that they emphasized this whole idea that they had their roots in like angels and all that, yet never did we really see them go to the land that they were trying to protect. And you would think right away, oh, why don't they just show that? I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and personally it's one of my biggest complaints because it would have been a really smart idea to go into that, and they never did it. And it would have been interesting to like see some people on that planet, because hey, I mean, different planet, not a bad idea. I mean, they haven't had a season on a different planet in years. And it's true, because years ago they definitely had some seasons that were meant to take place on different planets, some made up, some real, and they could just as easily have done that. And I mean, it wouldn't have hurt. And just as a whole, expand upon the characters a little bit more, give a little less airtime to Gosei Knight, or Robo Knight from America. I mean, you know, figure out what you need to do. And also the kid, the little boy that takes the man, sure, he's there to take the man, but at the same time he doesn't need to be a star. Like, look, he can be important, and he can have his moments, and he can be significant, and it's fine to have him as a significant character, but he doesn't necessarily have to be the world. And in reality, they center around him so much in the show that there's a lot less airtime for everyone else. So because of that, the show kind of falls flat in a lot of cases, and a lot of times you have to wonder, like, what are they thinking? Why is this smart in their minds? Like, do they realize that people aren't really happy when they do this? And the pacing gets screwed up. How they introduce things is kind of off at times, and the introductions to the villains are okay, or like sometimes okay. I think that the show itself had its moments that were good, for sure. I just think that they struggled to really go into things properly and really set up certain events and really try to expand upon certain points. Because if they had done all that, then Goseiger would have been regarded a lot better than it has been. Now, am I saying that this season has been one of the most hated seasons or disliked seasons? I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I would definitely say that it's pretty mixed, because it doesn't really go anywhere that's interesting, or it doesn't, I don't like, they don't have that much going for them. I mean, sure, the Tensou cards are kind of cool, but after a while they kind of get boring. And if they really, and that's another thing, if they expanded upon the Tensou and really emphasized the cards or something like that, and they try to do like all different types of cards rather than like what they really had, because I mean, other than the card game that America had, which the card game itself was, there's a lot going on, but in the show, I mean, it's the same kind of fire water like idea, and there's not much going on. If they added a lot more, I mean, at least then you would have had something to go by. And of course you may think to yourself, well, isn't that kind of like Maji Ranger in a way? It is, which is why if they kind of dipped into that idea a little bit more with having more cards featured rather than your same card 5 or 6 times, that isn't just your weapons, I might add, because a lot of times it's just weapons. If it's not weapons, it's the same typical attack, which is like fire, water, or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, you could do a lot more, and why aren't you? So yeah. So overall, I just wanted to do that video. Again, this has been a discussion about why I thought Goseiger really wasn't a great season as a whole. And remember, this is Tensou Sentai Goseiger. If you're curious about the full name, if you want to look it up, so that's the full name, Tensou Sentai Goseiger. And still, it has its moments, but there are other seasons that were in that same regard where they were not good, and they're recent. So we'll get to those eventually. I'm not sure if it'll be in the next week, or if it'll be sooner, or it'll be later. So we'll see what happens. So anyway, guys, this has been Crazy Samurai 71 here. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you guys again for watching. Anyway, guys, goodbye.